I may be short, but I'll use this right now. I apologize. I'm getting my Darth Vader with me for the camera to see. Mr. Speaker, what we face here today is a threat of unparalleled risk and a threat that we can no longer contain and no longer control if this motion is not allowed to pass. What we're facing here today is a potential harm that can outweigh any single benefit that the entire side of opposition can put forth today. We are about to ban the household use and sale of 3D printers. Now, before we begin this debate, before I actually explain to you when do we ban things and why are they bad, we're actually going to have to clarify first to you what actually a 3D printer is. Now, the info slide, he said quite well that you can print houses, you can print cars, and a lot of these nice fluffy stuff. So basically what this thing does, it takes a chunk of material, any given material, and it shapes it to the proper norm. You can create parts for cars, parts for houses, and most nominally, parts for guns. And it's exactly why we need to ban this right now. Because not only can you create parts for guns, not only can you create guns themselves, you can create more and more stuff that can usher in more harm. But that is not even the biggest harm. The biggest harm here is twofold. One, it's ease of access. No thank you. Ease of access, in a sec. The fact that you cannot actually, that you can traverse these designs via USB, via net update, via net link to any given person in any given part of the world. Anyone can get this from something the size as this little Porsche car, right? And the second thing is that we will have no control of it because people could be printing out guns in their basements. Now, before we begin, with our constructive closing. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Just in a second. Now, why we're banning this here, and I'll get to that, is because more and more printers you have in the public general market, the less their price will be, because you will have something called an overfill. When you have lesser and lesser prices, it tends to become more user-friendly and more easy to use. When it becomes more easy to use, it starts going on sales. When it starts going on sales, people can buy it. Now, we allow this already to happen most nominally in the United States of America, where you can buy the Colt 357 in any given Walmart, and we need to stem this risk right now. Now, we're planning a total ban to private owners, but not institutions. This is where I answer your point. Because we believe that this really can usher great benefits. You can maybe even print drugs. You can maybe even print some certain forms of medicine. You can print cars for the poor, houses for the poor, which is all good, but those things can be controlled because the state can control institutions. And this is where we get to the first example. One, we do not allow people to create their own weaponry. Why? Because then you have no serial numbers on that weaponry, you cannot trace them, you cannot track them, and they cannot be accounted for. But if we allow this motion to pass, that is exactly what will happen here. This is where we create the parallel. This is exactly why people cannot create medicine and drugs in their own basements, because they usually tend to create meth labs. But basically here, we can have some sort of enhanced control, right? Because we even don't know if you try to print your own gun, if you're trained, if you're an adequate user, whether or not you can use it for this or for that, and which is exactly why we see the harms that outweigh the benefits even more, because the benefits here are something that is actually devoid of life. Benefits are material things. You can get a house, you can get a car, you can get medicine, but the harms are taking off life, and any single benefit can be achieved through some form of conventional means, right? Which is exactly why we see that benefits can be achieved through other channels. We are better to go there because in that way we will avoid any given risk now. Now, actually, we ban things, and this is our second point, we ban things where potential harms are greater than potential benefits. This is exactly why we banned the people building guns in their basements. It's exactly why we ban people from actually acquiring certain forms of materials that can prove to be dangerous. Now, let's make a little parallel here. Nobody here is forbidden to use nuclear energy to bring power to their house, but you're forbidden from owning plutonium or uranium in your own private use because it's deemed too high of a risk, right? And now, what we'll have here is the fact that if the state should control it, then the state can trace it. If the state can trace it, then the state can account for it, right? Because And I'll give you one example here. This is actually a new thing. People are not so familiar with it. People do not know actually where they can get it all of that much. If it tends to become more popular and more accessible to more people, then people will be prone to use it like any single new thing, like MacBooks and iPods. And when its price begins to go down, for instance, like in tablets, this thing about a couple of years ago would be around $500. I bought it for $100, and the price continues to go down. If you have more demand, you have more supply, the price goes down. And we believe that the same thing will happen here, and we find it tremendously bad. Now, if we ban it, we're not actually claiming that any single demand will disappear, but we're claiming that if we ban it, the price will remain high enough for the risks to be diminished in sorts, right? Because if we can actually ban it, and if we can actually control who we give it to, then we can know whenever and wherever the problem steps out, right? Because let's think of it like this. No, thank you. Let's think of it like this. We have some dissidents and some militia who are up to no good. But when do they actually mobilize and when do they actually motivate to go against authority and to go against power? When they know that they can do it. When do they know that they can do it? When they have the means for it. Right now in the status quo, it's actually quite hard to achieve some sort of means of going against it. Even if you can buy some gun, we can trace it via serial number, we can find it, and we can find the person who sold it to you simply because of the rigid control that we have upon it. Now, we disagree that it is bad and we would ban them also, but right now, that is the second debate. Now here, the guns will be less and less tabooized up there in the people because there's a difference between a knife and a gun. A knife is something that you have in your common household that you use every day. It's not that big of a fuss. And plus, it takes skill to do some harm with a knife. But with a gun is still something like, oh, it's something that can kill people on sight. I better not mess with it. Even if I can juggle with knives, I'm less prone to juggle with guns, right? Because it's too dangerous, because it can kill faster, easier, it can kill more people, and it requires, up to a certain point, absolutely no skill to pull the trigger. And which is exactly why we have people with licenses to carry guns. We require licenses because we require training, because we require of knowledge on what they will use them for, if it's for self-defense or for some activization, right? Now, the entire side of government is here trying to prevent one simple thing. It's irreversible and undesirable harm. We do not want more people to die, which is the undesirable part, and it's irreversible because they will most certainly be prone to that, because more people and more people and more people will be able to acquire guns, and guns will be far more or less feminized in common discourse, which is exactly the single most biggest harm of this debate, and we're very proud to propose.
In the times when we wouldn't be having this technical development, if our lives weren't spent on the internet, in the times when internet was being controlled in criminal law spheres and everything else, maybe the motion of the government would stop. But in the moments when half of our lives is being actually placed in the technology world and placed on the internet, it's somehow quite hard to say that once we have those things printing stuff at home, that there will be like more problems, even if we compare it to the fact when those people are still buying those guns, buying those knives, and still doing horrible things. And it makes no difference whatsoever, are those bad things printed in their private homes or being bought privately and used privately in their homes also. So the side of the position cannot see any differences in the fact that those things are being printed at a certain moment. During my speech, I'd like to have a couple of points of rebuttal, and then I'll move to the constructive material of the opposition, saying that firstly, if it's potentially dangerous, we shouldn't be banning it because of its assumptions or whatever. And the second point is talking about actually how this might ban each and every future development in the future, and how actually this is something revolutionary, even when we're talking about private spheres, and even when we're talking about stuff being bought and used from the private spheres. So firstly, They said that this is the uncontrollable threat and that people will be buying guns and printing guns and killing people all around their private homes. Okay, fine. But today we have the situation that each and every person, as John said, when they have the mean for that, the mean is irrelevant. If those people have the mean to own the gun, to have money to buy that gun, knives, whatever else, they will buy the gun either on the black market or either legally, depending on which country is the situation we're at. And this situation is not solving anything. If we ban those, that doesn't mean that those people won't be able to use, buy, and do bad stuff with the guns which they will be able to buy at some other places. So this is not making any revolutionary progress. This is not solving the situation of having the threat coming from the guns, and this is definitely not solving the situation actually people killing people with those guns. Yes.
The point is that this situation will be even worse. It will be even more deteriorating if we let 3D printers exist.
It won't be even worse if we still have those laws which will be controlling the moment where somebody kills people with that gun. And the moment when the cause of having that gun is that situation is not the problem here. Because that person would still in the future kill someone with the same gun. The only difference is that paying on the internet to download the device and print it at home would be the difference that that device, that gun would be bought in the market or bought at a black market or whatever. So it wouldn't be worse. It would be basically the same. This is just like one way of getting that certain gun. And still, when he kills that person, it's easy to track him because he did commit a criminal offense, and at that moment he will still be punished, and nothing changed because it's still regulated. It's still criminal offense. It doesn't matter in which way was it made, in which way it was acquired. No, thank you. But it's the fact that it will still be controlled afterwards. The punishment will arrive, the sanction will arrive, and we will control that criminal offense once when it occurs, as we actually treat everything else. Secondly, that private stuff is private stuff, and it's hard to control who does that because we don't have any tracking or whatever. Yes, but as we heard before, it's downloadable. So those devices which will be printed are downloadable. That means that we have to have a certain source, which will be the one actually giving those downloadable stuff. The institution, organization, whoever is dealing with those downloadable things is the person who has a license. Each and every download should be tracked. And that's the moment when you see who tracked, who downloaded what at a certain situation. You have their IP address. It's even better than having the person who is going to the market and buying a gun, because you have the IP address from that person, which means that you actually have the address of their place. And in the second, when you see that the guy is actually downloading and printing gun back home, it's way easier to track them than in the status quo right now. So do we totally, from that uncontrollable threat, no thank you, uncontrollable flash wheel, we still don't believe that banning those 3D printers is solving anything or actually making the situation worse. We actually think that it might at some points be the situation quite better because it's easy to track them. But government would probably disagree. No thank you. Yes, afterwards, 2 points of the opposition. Why is it, if it's potentially dangerous, why should we ban it, or should we ban it at all? We have fertilizers. Fertilizer might be used when doing explosive devices and stuff. The thing with fertilizer was that it's quite stupid to ban fertilizers just because they're potentially dangerous. And in that moment we said, okay, once the criminal offense happens with the fertilizer, we will talk about the punishment and what happened afterwards, but we cannot control what is being used while committing a certain criminal offense. And in that matter, it doesn't matter whether it's 3D printers or downloadable devices or fertilizers. It's the same analogy, by the way. And just because we have the assumption we cannot ban something which might actually be quite good in the future, which might help save lives, which might have the situation quite easier. For people in the private households to have, no thank you, for people in the private households to have this 3D printer, that means that they can basically buy shoes at some point when they're unable to go out and buy those shoes. For example, if they're invalids and unable to walk. This is making a certain private life quite easier. And just because they're potentially, we have the assumption that something might go wrong at some point, with the same analogy with fertilizers, we cannot ban something which is totally being beneficial for these people, which is totally being beneficial for the state, for the budget, for the future developments, and for those people which will make their lives quite easier. Especially when we see that nothing is changing and that we'll still be controlling actually the spheres happening once we print out the gun. No thank you, no thank you. And secondly, what the opposition is claiming actually is the fact that this is a revolutionary thing. Once when we were buying things at the stores, the biggest expense and biggest cost is buying those things with the transport, because you have to transport a certain thing from the factory to the store where we're buying that. With 3D printers, that extra cost, which is making those private labs quite more expensive and quite more harder, is disappearing, because at that moment you're paying only the downloadable thing that you want to download, And in that moment, it's going directly to you. And this is first why is it revolutionary, why is it also beneficial for those people living in the private households, so the private spheres, and beneficial for those people who were on the market up to now and now have a certain way of actually cutting their, spending some money, cutting the budget, and using those money maybe something else, something new. And also, the moment in which we are banning something just upon the assumption, and we know, and we still haven't tried because we're still debating about whether it should be good or bad to have those 3D printers or not, we do believe that we have to try. Once we try, we can talk about what's going on and how are we facing that. But we cannot ban something based on the assumption of the government saying that we will do and have only horrible things happening on. When the side of the opposition strongly opposes the motion, strongly believes that this is something revolutionary needed, both in the private and public spheres, we do believe that it has more benefits than it has certain harms, and we do believe that it's controllable via the criminal law way, bringing the punishment when somebody committed a horrible crime. And for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, what the opening opposition wants to persuade you here is that laws simply make crime go away, is that laws make people behave rationally, is that laws and systems and our state messages can change the criminal system or criminal structures that exist in our society and can even be more influential than the dominant culture of violence which exists in our society and culture of weapons, which will be a part of my substantive. We contradict that aggressively. Now, before the substantive, which will tackle the culture of violence, the culture of weapons, and how this is basically going to be a debate about weapons, because in reality, in 3D printers world, we will print weapons, and this will be the most important issue in today's society. And also about a bit of a stakeholder analysis, how criminals will react to this and how people who are not criminals will react to this and be more prone to using weapons, even though they are not criminals. I have 4 brief points of rebuttal. 1, if laws prevented murders, we wouldn't have murders. That doesn't happen. Moreover, if putting people into jail as a deterrent factor would be enough, the United States of America wouldn't be the country with most prisoners and still with most guns and most violent crimes. Therefore, we don't see enough deterrent factor of laws and prisons in order to be peaceful and to say, okay, that is probably enough. Second point is, yeah, well, maybe they will buy it in the black market. Now, we have already tackled that. If you buy something in the black market, it will be far more expensive. We will tackle it as a state, but maybe it will exist like a black market. But it will be far more expensive because it is risky to sell it, it is risky to produce it, and it is much harder to do so. Therefore, it will not simply explode into our free trade economy, as Jonovic pointed out, as it will happen if we don't ban it. Why? Because technology works that way. It gets better by a day, by a week, by a month, and therefore it gets much, much cheaper. So it will be cheaper and cheaper as time goes by, and also it will be more accessible. That's a problem we want to tackle here. Now, thirdly, what they say is we can control the internet, we can track back who has done it. 2 responses to that. 1, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev found out how to build a bomb by using internet, which we are heavily trying to control. Therefore, it is not that easy to use it. Second response is basically that we think that people will find a way to override this effect, as they have done so many times regarding the internet law. Therefore, it is not that easy to do so, and we believe that this point is still on our side. And what about the third point, which is my final point of rebuttal about fertilizers? I'll take you in my substantive. Fertilizers. There is a huge difference. When we allowed fertilizer to be produced, we didn't have a culture of violence and of weapons that we have today. And secondly, it is much harder to make a bomb with fertilizers than it is to print a gun in your basement. Therefore, we don't see the analogy being good here. You will have to provide us with a much better example in Nika's speech to persuade us in this point. Now, my substantive is this. What we believe has 2 elements. 1 is cultural, fluffy thing. Second is about a bit of a stakeholder analysis. Firstly, about the culture of violence. We live in a culture, and we are talking about the United States of America and the Western world here in this debate, And basically, the most popular video games are the aggressive video games. The most popular shows are the aggressive shows, the shows in which you harm another human being, like reality shows. Or thirdly, wrestling, beating up other people. We see aggression as such being very important in our society and being very applauded in our society, being considered a sort of a value that you should possess, a sort of a trademark, that you should be aggressive, you should fight for yourself. We have an overly aggressive society. And moreover, we have a culture of violence as a sort of a field to prove your worth. We think that's very bad, especially among the youth, because we believe that the young people, when they are fighting each other on many levels, can very easily go to the extent to compete against each other on who can print the better gun and who can bring the better gun to the table and therefore be a bigger hotshot. We see this happening in all sorts of places, especially in ghettos, etc., etc. We don't want more guns in ghettos. This will bring them easily. Now, secondly, about the culture of guns that we have. We have a culture of guns to that extent that we can't even vote for background checks in America. Because we have a culture of guns which say that guns is the most sacred thing that you can have and the most sacred freedom and the best thing that you can possibly have in your life, to that extent that we can't even impose a policy which is completely rational and good. Why is this a problem? It's because if 3D printers get to the market, the problem will be that we cannot possibly advocate later on to simply ban them or to simply regulate them, because we'll have all these sorts of lobby groups, all these sorts of political subjects that will be like, this is our Second Amendment law, right? You cannot possibly take this away from us. Now, before I take you, Syriza, the point of this is, in today's world, which has in which culture of aggression and culture of violence is very much present, we don't want to risk 3D printers, which will be a means to get culture of violence driving even more, therefore to get even more guns. And I will prove that much further, because, but before that, Syriza.
All countries have a culture of violence, and if your problem is the United States, they'll still have the Second Amendment, even after you implement this policy, they'll still buy guns and shops.
Of course they'll buy guns and shops, but they will even have more guns. I mean, what is completely unclear about our notion? It's very clear. Yes, you will still unfortunately have guns. But ladies and gentlemen, if you have 3D printers, if you can buy them and you can put them in your basement, and you will, because they will be cheaper and easier to use. That's how technology works. You will have more guns. And Syriza, that point is basically our point. So thank you for that. If people want more guns and have this Second Amendment, they will have even more guns when they have an easier way of doing so. And why is it bad to have more guns? Because we believe that more guns brings more violence into homes and onto our streets. And this is like two parts of my stakeholder analysis. One, with the criminals and terrorists, we don't want them to for the weapons for them to be so accessible. We don't want that, and we don't want even to risk it. And secondly, about the common people who have guns, who love them because they were being, simply persuaded this is their political very important right. We believe that they shouldn't have that easy access to their guns and to their weapons, because they are prone to cultural influences of the country. In the United States of America and other countries, we have too many guns, especially that's just an example, and we shouldn't have another means implemented that will only further this sort of system that is happening. And in the end, the example that proves this is that all over the news, what was the news about 3D? That the gun that we printed works. No one is talking about anything else that 3D printers can print but the guns. The gun can work, the whole world knows it. That's the most important thing today. That's why we shouldn't even risk this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, what the opposition believes is that we need to discuss is this only potentially bad or necessarily bad? So if we can prove that there are tons of benefits and only a possibility of misusage, we believe that we've proved it's basically like kitchen knives that also have a possibility of misusage. And B, we need to prove to you why the benefits that are coming from 3D printing are so insanely revolutionary and life-saving, and we'll do this, that this actually outweighs the possible costs. Before I do that, and before I talk about the principles behind this and what it means to have private property and ownership in my home, I'm going to do a couple of reality checks for the side of the government. A, we're talking about a technology that isn't yet developed. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can print a 3D gun out of paper and try to shoot you with it, but chances are I probably won't kill you. If I want to print a 3D gun, I have to be able to afford to print a 3D gun now or 10 years from now, yada, yada, yada. We do not understand how this differentiates itself from me being able to buy an illegal and untraceable gun anywhere on the black market, and the side of the government hasn't really shown us how. What we do give you as an alternative, though, is that it's kind of easier to track people by their IPs because you don't have to have physical people tracking the black market. What you do have is an analytical tool that can track traffic for basically everybody who owns a computer and has internet, which is something we can't have with physical checks and physical black markets of guns. So if people will buy guns, we prefer them to buy them in a way that is at least theoretically traceable by us. Now, 2 points of rebuttal. A, I've already begun with the first one, which is how 3D printing changes the usage of guns. The average person cannot print a 3D gun now and probably will not be able to do it later because if nothing else you have been the resources you need to create a gun. But further on, no way in hell that's going to be cheaper than an illegal gun bought second-hand from someone who already used it and is already in the market. So we don't believe that this changes the way guns are bought drastically. We only mean it makes it perhaps a bit easier for you to do it in your home. And second of all, when they talk about the violent culture and how people want guns, etc., etc. No, Mr. Speaker, we don't believe this deals with the violent culture. What it does create, though, and generally what making guns illegal creates is that the only people who own guns are people who don't have problems with committing the criminal activity of buying a gun in the first place. Therefore, we stand behind the Second Amendment. We do believe that that people should be allowed to buy guns, and we do not prefer the option in which the only people owning guns are people who are by definition criminals and do not have problem in engaging with criminal activities. Now, Mr. Speaker, since we don't believe that changing the way 3D printers print guns is this important and makes such a big difference, what we do believe it does is that it gives us the possibility of do some other stuff like, I don't know, print pacemakers in your own home if it's a moment when you actually really need a pacemaker and you might die if you're not able to print it right up. So while there might be a potential for a gun that will kill you, there's also a potential for a pacemaker that will say you go.
That's why we have the state does it, the Ministry of Health do it, and other institutions as government does it.
Yeah, but that's just production. That's a different way of producing property that's already there. The difference with me being in my house is that the moment that Stella starts having a heart attack in my house at my party, or the moment, I don't care, the moment her heel breaks, I'm capable of doing something in the moment in my house. Now, this is a drastical difference from leaving and going somewhere and then printing whatever I want to print in a publicly controlled facility. Mr. Speaker, we do believe it is possible to impose controls or trackers on activity happening on the internet. We're not 100% sure how we're supposed to do it in this case, but hey, guess what? It's probably because the printing technology isn't really all that developed just yet. However, if we do allow people to have it, let me make something clear. The first people who will have access to it are the people who can afford it. Now, the people who can afford it can now test design whole bunch of variety of different stuff we couldn't even think about in the first place. So what you're doing with this proposal is you're actually limiting the people's possibility to investigate, to develop new designs, to develop new technologies, etc., etc. What we also believe you're doing is that you're imposing a non-reasonable sanction for something that could be awesome. Madam Speaker, the fact that I have to buy stuff from an eBay, but then wait for them to arrive from China for a month, slows down the trade and makes it harder for me to deal in selling and buying stuff online. Now, this technology moves us a step further into living and reliving in the virtual world, and we think this is awesome. This means that sometime in the future, when the technology is developed enough, we will have no geographical restrictions on what we can trade with, what we can print, what we can deliver and buy anywhere, except the ones we have decided to impose on downloadable content. So we believe that if you ban this technology now, you're basically banning an entire branch and industry from developing, with the only, just a second, Marcus, when the only argumentation, well, people could print guns. Go, second.
If the pacemaker recipe I got from you is somewhat faulty and I die from that, what's happening?
Okay. We don't believe that banning owning printers at home will be what's solving these issues. We believe that we need to impose certain restrictions, well, not restrictions, but rules on who can sell and who can buy stuff. But Marcus, if you decide to buy Viagra right now on the market and you die from it, this is basically the same principle. You have made a choice of buying a bad product, and you have decided to use a bad medicine. Now, I'm sorry about that, but the effect is exactly the same. There is nothing new in this proposal regarding to misusage. So, Mr. Speaker, what we believe is the issue here right now is that the government is incapable of proving any new substantive different harm coming directly from 3D printing. People who want to kill other people can still do it and are capable of doing it in untraceable ways, or at least with untraceable weapons. We believe this gives us a bigger chance of tracing weapons. We believe that if you do not ban the technology, but rather as it develops, create different limits and rules on who can use it, how they can use it, etc., we can prevent the rather unlikely scenario the government is talking about. We believe that this does not solve the problem of violence, and we don't think this is the basic issue underlying here. But what we mostly believe is that you don't have the right to ban people from a potentially wonderful branch just because you believe there is a chance of misusage that is no greater than the status quo. We beg you to oppose.
I'm going to sweat for you guys. Time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, on the floor. Now, we've heard very much in this first round, and Proposition explained this very well, that this is very dangerous because you cannot control very known dangers anymore. You know, anyone can print a gun, and I mean, it's really, you can't really do anything against that, and they analyze this very well. We believe, and this is going to be our extension, that this actually, this kind of danger that is inherent in it being unknown and uncontrollable goes for all products, and we believe that fundamentally a government should protect its citizens from faulty products that could be dangerous because of some kind of design mistake, but also could be dangerous because other people intend it to be dangerous and you have no idea that it will be dangerous. Furthermore, I'm going to argue how this will actually reinforce the imbalance that there is in the world economy, and how it will actually take away the chances for third world countries to develop, because it will take away the only advantage that they have, the only comparative advantage that they have in terms of economics. So, to start off with a little bit of rebuttal, we really didn't actually hear a lot of tangible benefits from opposition, right? They said, yeah, you don't really need to, don't have to go to the store anymore, and it's easier, and you don't need transport. Okay, you don't have to go to the store in the status quo. There's Amazon.com. Secondly, you still, the resources for these 3D printers don't just magically appear in the 3D printers. You still have to transport them. And in fact, because these things are all localized, you actually have less bulk transport, meaning that you have a lot more small trucks running around, and also, which is a lot more polluting for the environment. Opposition clearly didn't consider this, but it's actually, it's very, the marginal benefits that they mentioned aren't actually benefits at all, but actually pretty big drawbacks. So, on to my constructive. So we believe that the government actually has a task, a fundamental task, that to make sure that the products we use are safe. So how do we do this in the status quo? Because this analysis hasn't actually been given anywhere in this debate so far. A company invents something. This is what happens. A company, or people work in the company, they have an idea, they invent it, they develop it, they test it, they make sure it's safe, they make sure it works. And then they put it on the market. Why do they have to take all these steps? It's very simple. Because companies are identifiable entities.
You know that if you buy a toaster with the Philips logo on it, that if the toaster explodes in your face, you can sue Philips for it. If you download something from a company, you don't even know if that is a legit company. You know, it could just be a website that is fronting for a terrorist group or 4chan. So companies producing faulty products and get sued and even get shut down if they actually keep on doing this and keep on producing faulty products. So there's a huge incentive for companies to, in fact, not produce faulty products, to, in fact, produce safe items, which is why you generally don't have toasters blowing up in our face. And when it's actually a big thing in the news, when, for instance, a Chinese company does produce a faulty toaster that does blow up in your face. And so since we actually and that's actually also, Stella, sorry, Nika, why Marcus doesn't buy his Viagra on the black market, but does go to a company that actually sells identifiable Viagra, and which you know has been tested thoroughly. Right, Marcus? Yes. Yes, okay. So, no, thank you, Stella. So, opposition, what opposition basically wants to do, which would happen if we don't actually go through with this proposition, is that you shift this burden of safety checks from the companies to the individual. And we believe that this is problematic. First of all, because individuals actually have no particular knowledge of what is dangerous in a machine. An individual doesn't know that if you combine component X with Y, it will blow up in your face. So if there is a faulty schematic that they download from some website or the other, because it's cheap and it's cheaper than the Philips thing in the store, go Philips, you actually don't know. You cannot identify this as a consumer. So you have no way of actually making sure that what you are buying is safe because you simply don't have this knowledge. Companies do actually have this knowledge. You have this vast institutional knowledge because they are entities of hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have actually acquired this knowledge over decades, and also have hundreds of trained, university-educated people in their staff making sure that their products work. Right, Stella?
Yes, but you're not buying the product from Marcus's bathroom. You're buying a product from a company with your factory that actually made licenses for the product before, and the only difference between
okay, all right. So how do you know that the website you're downloading the schematics from is actually real? How do you know it's not fronting for some kind of Do you believe that the average housewife or the actual average senior will actually start checking IP addresses before they buy something and like, oh wait, this is actually from Zimbabwe because I know the Zimbabwean IP address? No, they won't. They actually have no idea if the things they are buying are from a legit company or not. So, moreover, not only do they actually, and this actually leads me into the second part of this analysis, groups of knowledgeable people, swarms we can call them, on the internet, such as 4chan or such as terrorist groups, can actually produce dangerous items that are intended to be dangerous. And they can post them like ordinary items, but are actually very dangerous. And consumers cannot recognize this as being dangerous, as I said. So imagine, for instance, a terrorist group. They built this website, and they say, this is a new sewing machine. They say this is cheaper than the sewing machine you can buy in the store, it works just as well. But in fact, inside there's actually an ignition mechanism and a bomb. And when you turn it on, it actually blows up in your face and you die and your house blows up as well. So, when you actually, they sell this on a legit looking website, right? And hundreds, if not thousands of people buy this. How many people will die from this bomb before the government can track this down and inform everyone? I don't know how, but inform everyone how it's actually going to explode in their face and they shouldn't buy this, right? So basically the point of all this is that this whole thing is a black box. It is uncontrollable. We're always going to be chasing the facts of people that mean to harm you. And we believe that this is a fundamental challenge, no thank you, this is a fundamental challenge and misstep for a government to allow. Okay, so now on to the third world point. I have only this much analysis, so I'm just going to do this like that. So basically, what is currently the only way for third world countries to get out of poverty? They produce cheap items. Most of the items that will be produced by 3D printers will be cheap items. So the reason why companies in the Western world do actually employ third world people is because they have lower wages. Currently, for a lot of low-cost items, like for instance garments, they're actually very labor-intensive to produce, but very cheap in terms of resources. So the reason why people would want to produce it in third world countries and afford those people jobs is because the labor costs. But if you actually can print a shirt in a giant factory in Germany, then kind of the labor costs don't really factor in anymore. And we believe that this is actually reinforcing the lead that the West already has economically and technologically over these third world countries, because they can no longer accrue foreign reserves, they can no longer actually work themselves out of poverty, and they can no longer, in fact, establish an economy that will then foster its own indigenous growth. So because we believe that in fact the government cannot allow this to happen, because it will fundamentally challenge the safety of its citizens and cannot guarantee the safety of its citizens anymore, and because it will actually be bad for the development of third world countries and economies and will reinforce the monopolies of the West, we believe that we should really propose this motion.
We believe that an important part of this debate has been left out. That is the right of people to pursue happiness. How they can do that? Why is that important for their own conception of themselves and their own pursuit of happiness? When the state can actually limit that? What are the problems with states intervening in a person's pursuit of his own happiness? And finally, why all the potential for misuse which can possibly result from the use of 3D printers are quite marginal and can be foreseen and therefore stopped. Before that, I have a few points of rebuttal. The first one goes on opening government, and they talk about a culture of violence that exists, which we need to stop. We have a few answers on that. Firstly, we say that guns don't kill people. People kill people. Why is this important? The simple fact that some country has a big ownership of guns, such as the United States do, does not necessarily mean that that country will have a big murder rate. We point out to two other examples. Switzerland and Serbia are the third and second countries by gun ownership in the world, but those countries have very low rates of murder in comparison with other European countries where gun ownership is low. So we don't necessarily think that because people won't be able to print guns as much, that we'll have lesser murder rates. Secondly, we say, however, that the fact that you ban 3D printers doesn't change a culture of violence which they presuppose exists in any of those societies. People will still take honor in the Second Amendment. They will still buy guns in regular shops, so you don't change the culture of violence which you're intending to change. Thirdly, we say banning some sort of culture doesn't lead to it going extinct. We point out to the fact that the war on drugs hasn't been successful in reducing drug use in the last 40 years. So just going strong on a certain type of behavior, just banning it outright doesn't actually stop it. Now we move on to the second half. And in essence, what they bring to you is, because people aren't always aware of the risks, governments need to be aware of the risk for the people, and they need to ban this outright. We completely disagree with this. We have 5 reasons why. Firstly, we say you have peer reviews. You can see what other people thought of a certain product, of a certain download, and how well it was. If a certain product brought a virus to your computer, user reviews often say that, and you can often see which products are the most based, and based on that you can see which ones to download. Secondly, we say that there are illegitimate and legitimate sources in the real world as well, and we don't legislate this. Like I said, you have used cars. It's called a market for lemons. People buy a used car from another person. They don't know how good the car is or not, but we still don't ban that type of behavior. We believe that individuals have the capabilities to take a risk upon themselves. If you buy something from a site made in very primitive Flash and with text written in Comic Sans, then it's probable that that site isn't as legitimate as you thought it to be. If it's a subsidiary of Amazon, if it's owned by a big company, you can presuppose that the product you can get from that site is the legitimate one. So there are many different mechanisms of how this actually functions. Thirdly, we say that states also do not always have perfect information. States can also give bad products to their citizens. We saw this happen, for example, in this country during the H1N1 pandemic a few years ago, where the government, by mistake, bought a series of bad vaccines from Novartis, even to those who weren't needed. So even the state doesn't have perfect information. Even the state can make a bad decision. Fourthly, we say that states not only can do this, but they can often have very bad intentions. They can subsidize a certain part of the industry, so they can say you can only print domestic cars, and by that they can stop their own citizens from getting the best possible product. So the state can also have their own intentions, and they cannot always pursue the best possible information for the customer. Lastly, we say that even private companies, which they also say institutions, can print these products, where people can also have some other some other intentions. We also find this highly problematic. We believe that a company may want you to print a product which will make you buy, which will maybe break up very soon, so you have to print it again. We believe that also private companies, even though they have the bigger knowledge, can on purpose give you bad information in order for you to get their products. And this is where we get to our extension. We feel, no thanks, that this part has been missing out of the debate. And that is why the state doesn't actually have a right to ban this sort of behavior. Because we generally believe that people have a right to pursue their own happiness in the way they best see fit. We believe that 3D printers are a very good way to achieving this. You can print your own shoes. You can, if you live in a conservative community and you're a woman which likes that sort of behavior, you can print a dildo. You can do whatever you want. But the point is, you can enjoy yourself in the way you best see possible, and we believe that individuals are in the best position to make these choices from themselves. We don't think that the state nor private companies know better than me what makes me the happiest. We believe that a certain individual is best placed to make that kind of decision. No thanks. Okay, so why do we say that the state cannot actually legislate this type of behavior, and why is it problematic? Firstly, the states have a tendency to regulate every area where they put their fingers in. So they can say, you can print this type of product, but you can't print this one. We believe this is also harmful because individuals can better choose than the state what makes them the happiest. No thanks. But more importantly, we believe there's a big pressure on certain individuals to choose certain types of product if they can only print them in government shops. For example, if I want to buy a sex toy, or if I want to print a sex toy and I live in a conservative community, I'm very unlikely to do that because the state stopped me, because there's a huge social pressure on me not to do that. Opening.
Even if you accept that liberal notion, we still believe that there are states, like North Korea, who believe that it is in their best interest to pursue nuclear weapons, but we still ban it because of general interest.
Okay, but yeah, I understand. But here's the thing. We don't think that 3D printers are advanced right now to print something as complex as a nuclear weapon. But more importantly, we say that even if there came a time when they were possible to print something as a nuclear weapon, we think that states would be advanced enough also not actually to get a plan for a nuclear weapon online so you can download it. We don't think you can magically print a nuclear bomb. You would need somewhere to download it from. We don't think that it is highly likely for that information to get online. Lastly, we say that the state isn't always a neutral actor. It represents the interest of the majority. We see this as problematic because the majority can impose a certain measure on individuals just because they think it is right. So you can print some products, but you can't print other ones. We think this is problematic because generally we don't think that other citizens, only because they make a majority in the state, have a right to impose that you can take some products, but you can't take other ones. Lastly, we say that, one, people will always find a way to get guns if they want to get guns. People, not only that, there are checks. We can check your IP, we can check your downloads, and we think that too little people will misuse this as a way to achieve happiness, just to be legitimate enough for us to ban it. For all these reasons, we beg to oppose.
This is a debate about whether there should be a state and companies be controlling what is in the market or individuals themselves be controlling what is in the market. This is what this debate is about. And I will summarize it along 3 points. First is called couch potato. The second one is called guns kill people. And the third one is called black swan and the rabbit. Rabbit, I say. So firstly, couch potatoes. What we had in first half is what the benefits would be of this thing. Firstly, that I do not have to move to get the goods I want to have, that I could print them right away, right now in my home. Well, we do have something similar right now. It's called internet, and you can order over it. You can order a pizza over an app, you can order everything you want, and it's delivered to your door. So the advantage is a few hours, not more. Secondly, this is what Michiel brought you additionally, is that it is not costless, as they claimed, to produce stuff. Probably the raw substances are there and they're expensive. Probably the machines themselves cost money. So you don't really have this costless dream world they have, and the goods also have to be delivered. This revolution, they claim, this new thing basically sums up to nothing but innovation, supposedly. I will come back to innovation later in my speech. Secondly, guns kill people. Well, we heard from First Prop that it is bad to have guns because things can happen. They say, well, yeah, they're forbidden already. We have reason to assume that the criminals have guns and the others don't have guns. We do believe that it's a valid decision you can make. If you live in a state where guns are forbidden, you should forbid them. If you want to legalize them, you legalize them. However, I additionally bring you what Michael said, that the danger is for the good guys to download a recipe for a gun which is faulty, which then blows up in their face. So in that instance, dear closing, guns kill people because they're faulty, or the printer didn't work correctly. Because what you have with guns you can buy on the market, they're produced somewhere, they're tested, diligently tested, they're tested whether they work or not. If you have a printed product, it is not pre-tested before you use it. So it could well be that in the case you want to defend yourself against a criminal, you lose your hand in the process because the product wasn't correct. Then they said, well, you know, you can actually track the IPs of people who download products. Yeah, well, how good is that working nowadays? How good is working tracking IPs for illegal download stuff? How good is it working to track what 4chan people are organizing in a Swamp Thing and flood things by masking their IPs? I do believe that we do have the same danger we have with computer viruses right now, we will then have with 3D printers, because anything that people can think of can then be printed for some reason, not only guns, and this is where we extend it massively. So, Black Swan and the Rabbit. The difference we are talking about is, firstly, which is what we stand for, we have companies who have these 3D printers. They can innovate, but they have not the danger because they have to test the products before they get to people. And they claim that we have households. They claim there is innovation and there is no danger. We proved you that there is some danger. But one thing about the companies and the innovation first. Most innovation in our world is made by people who work for companies because they're paid for. Resources and research is done to make sure that it happens. A rebut to that innovation point now. How do you think is innovation going to happen if recipes are all over the place and everyone can just print an innovation? Do we have an interest as a company to actually pursue innovation if I cannot make a profit of producing it? I don't think this will be the case. The innovation is way bigger if we actually have companies doing that rather than individuals and households doing that. What's more, we have a burden from the state. The burden of the state is to ensure that we live in a system, in a market system, where the products we can use are safe to use. Well, they say self-actualization. They say, well, we can live in freedom and do whatever we want. Yes, sure we can, but I do not have unlimited time, and informing myself is very costly. So if I do stuff, and if I do print, and if I self-actualize in any way or form, I would love to rely on stuff that I know to be safe. And if I have economic restraints, or if I cannot move, I'd probably take a recipe which was promised to me, or which was nice and something. I maybe, if I'm in the need for Viagra, I may just click this button, I push the button, get a Viagra pill. The difference is that the ones I buy in the market are tested. And I know that the result will be only the result I wish it to be, and not any side effect that I may not wish it to be. Opening.
No, the only difference is that now you need to check for online reviews the way you do when you do with movies. But even products physically produced by someone in a reflection of guns and bills you buy on the Turkish market are bad for your health.
All right, okay. I come to that point in a second. First of all, the choices point that was mentioned here. Well, if you live in a rural community and you need to have shoes that look differently, fucking order them over the internet. If you need clothes that are different, you can order it over the internet. You can cut them yourself. You can produce your own stuff, which is then comparatively safe because the raw materials you get are safe and tested by the market. You don't need this printing mechanism to be a whole person. You opened a false dichotomy. You said only because we're not able to control everything, we shouldn't control anything. We don't think this is true. We believe we should control as much as possible to make life for people as easy and safe as possible. So, back to your question. We do have a system of law that provides for a structure when a company does something faulty, when something faulty is imported, when the vaccines are not correct and right. We do have somebody to blame. We, if we download something from trustworthy sources, maybe also have somebody to blame, but maybe also not. Maybe there is a meme going around for some things to be printed, we don't know where they come from. And maybe they're potentially dangerous. Maybe it's nice blowing up fireworks machine building stuff. You know, we don't know this. And this is what Michael brought you, the black swan. There's an unknown. People innovate. People in the internet do crazy, crazy stuff. They can invent new sex toys which promise something but are incredibly harmful on the other hand. So we don't know what is going to happen. We have a situation where we can push a button and we don't know what the result of pushing that button will be. I don't want to push this button because the risk and dangers are incredibly high if we do not have it in a controlled environment. And lastly, and this was not responded to at all, we do have developing economies of some sort who are having all their labors rely on cheap labor, like for example they produce screwdrivers or electrical sockets. If we allow private households to have that easy produced, like for example Bangladesh will have a huge problem with unemployment without us gaining anything particular rather than having it now instead of a few hours later. I don't think this benefit outweighs the harm that can be done in the developing economies. So for the reasons, I don't want anyone to push a button to print something that doesn't give any benefit. I don't want anyone to push a button on a faulty gun that explodes in their face. And I certainly do not want to push a button on a pill that I take and it does something weird. And I don't want the button pushed to consequences we cannot foresee and therefore as a state have to act. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Basically, we see this debate coming down to the question whether liberty overcomes this assumption, and we believe it does on individual level, both on collective level, and on the other hand is why we believe that we will be able to control these harms that are potential and that we actually believe that are not going to happen. That is basically how I'm going to summarize this debate. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. So firstly, we believe that people tend to be rational, especially when it comes to their life. So if they are aware of the fact that they're printing something so serious that can actually cause their death, we do believe that they will check online as much as things as possible how to actually print that thing. Second, they will always download it from good websites. Thirdly, they will always try to find information how to go to those good websites which they can see on the internet because people are constantly discussing things over the internet. And fourthly, you can always find a user guide and see how to print something and how to use it in order not to harm yourself. And we believe that people will do this because we think that people do not want to die or use this. On the other hand, if we're talking about someone who apparently doesn't care about his life, then anything that state does actually won't help him save his own life because apparently he has decided that he doesn't care for himself, and if he doesn't, no one else actually can. Second thing, and my partner already mentioned this, state doesn't always know the best. State does not have all the information that are necessary. So you had an example with milk in Serbia, that God knows what is actually in our milk today, that God knows whether or not it can prevent cancer, yet the state is the one who decided to take care of us, and we can actually question whether or not they were successful. Also, what we wanted to say is that many things were unknown to these societies and many things seem to look like a potential danger, but yet we realize that benefits that we can gain from them are so huge that we need to continue, do research on that and gather information. And that is what we did every time when we found out something. And that is why we believe that we will also be able to find out many things, how we can use this in order to develop benefits more and in order to make harms as small as possible. Now, on to our clashes. So firstly, why we believe that on an individual level liberty is important. We believe that every individual has right to pursue its happiness, and we believe that is extremely important because basically that is the reason why we have state, that is the reason why we have society, to help individuals to pursue their happiness, to live the best life by their own criteria without harming anyone else. And that is what we see as this happening. So we believe that individuals do know what is best for themselves because they do know everything about themselves, what they like, what what they hate, what makes them feel satisfied, etc., etc. And we believe that by having this in their own house, they will be able to pursue their happiness without having other individuals or even state getting involved with that. And we believe that it is extremely bad to have state getting involved with this for many reasons. Firstly, because state doesn't know what I like and what I hate. State only thinks for itself. Secondly, state is not something objectively and abstract. State is also formed of people who have their own opinions and who have their own attitudes, which also influence on how they perceive someone's happiness. Thirdly, because that state was voted by majority of people, and that majority also had a concept of good life, which means that state will always try to put that concept on us and to make us respect that concept. And today we as a society have agreed the state should not give us the concept of a good life. Every individual should make his own concept of good life, and state should be there in order to protect other citizens from being harmed, but not to put them a moral concept above them. Before I continue opening.
Yes, we agree with you. Pursuing happiness is okay as our limits and freedom that people have, but to limit those freedoms, we limit the pursuit of happiness when it can usher in more harm than it can. For instance, we limit freedom of speech when it can cause their...
I understand. We don't see these harms being so big in order to actually jeopardize someone's pursuit of happiness, which will actually come later. So what we think is that the only way for a certain individual to be the happiest is to not have state getting involved with that. And we think that is extremely important if we want to have a just society. Second is a collective benefit that we see, and that is that many people post many different ideas on internet online, and they always discuss about them, and they always try to make them even better. The benefit for collective, for everyone that we see is that actually now not only that people can discuss about ideas and question how they can look in reality, but they can also make their idea become a reality. They can also have other people buying products that they came up with by downloading them, and you will have many people discussing online whether those products were good, what could be better about those products, what should be fixed about those products, etc., etc., which will actually make many ideas of our society becoming true. But not only that, but also through discussion and through having all people individually pursuing their own happiness and giving their own attitudes, you will have a constant progress of everything that they're actually developing and coming up with. No, thank you. And now, on to why we believe that we can actually control the harms and why we think that these two benefits and many others are actually more important. Because firstly, we can always check on what you're actually downloading. So if we see that you're constantly downloading something that could be defined as sociopath, and then if we see that you downloaded a gun, we can apparently see that you're going to harm someone else. And that is the moment where state can come in, when there is an obvious harm for a third individual, but not in situations where I'm only doing something that can make me happy. No, thank you. Secondly, we think that we can find them more easily right now because we can always watch what are they downloading and what are they doing, which in cases of some crimes actually happening, it would be much easier for us to find who actually committed it. Because means of checking will be stronger, because it's not that people are not aware of the fact what this actually means and what can actually happen. So when they know that they're facing something that is still unknown to them, they will try to make systems of checks and balances as harsh and as good as possible in order to prevent all potential harms that can happen. So not only that we can track them, but moreover, we will constantly try to develop our systems of checking so we could prevent all the bad things that can happen. Second thing is also that we can have big penalties for misuse, which will also be effective on people because they will be aware of the fact that if they try to misuse this sort of things, the punishment is going to be extremely big, which will also be sort of de-incentivization for them to actually misuse something that can create so many benefits in our society. And if we're talking about extremists that our government was so concerned about, firstly, even in status quo, even without that, they can always find a way how to actually do something bad. They can either go in the United States and buy, I don't know, a gun, they can take a knife out of their house and go and stab someone out on the street. If someone is so determined to make something bad happen, nothing we do can actually prevent him from that. And second thing is that we believe that in status quo, too little people are actually doing it, because if too many people were interested in making bad things happen, then we would have anarchy in our society, and we don't. And we believe that we are not going to have it if we allow these things. And for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose this motion. Thank you.